At 1 in the morning, my door burst open and my daughter crumpled against me. Her face was swollen, her eyes dark, her mouth bleeding. Through tears, she told me the truth. My husband attacked me for choosing his mistress. I didn't shout, I didn't ask questions. I held her, guided her inside, and locked the door behind us. In silence, I pulled on my police uniform, steady hands, calm breath. I checked my weapon, loaded every round with purpose. Then I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. Start the plan now. I'm glad you're here. Like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're listening to this revenge story from. I want to see how far it reaches. I had just come home from another double shift, my uniform still smelling of metal and rain. The city was quiet in that dangerous way that pretends to sleep. I kicked off my boots, dropped my keys on the table, and let myself sink into the couch. My body ached, but my mind refused rest. Years on the force teach you that calm never lasts. That was when the knock came. Not polite, not patient. It was frantic, desperate, like fists arguing with the door. When I opened it, my daughter collapsed forward, barely standing. Her face was swollen, skin purple and yellow, lips split, eyes empty. I caught her before she hit the floor and pulled her inside. The door shut behind us, locking out the night. She was shaking so hard I thought her bones might break. I wrapped her in my arms and waited. After a long moment, she whispered the truth. He hit me. Not once, not by accident. My husband, the man I trusted, chose his mistress and punished my daughter for discovering it. Anger rose, sharp and clean, but I swallowed it. Emotion clouds judgment. I laid her on the couch, cleaned the blood, and called an ambulance without sirens. While we waited, I watched her breathe and made a decision. This would not be loud. This would be precise. I changed back into my uniform, button by button, until the mother disappeared and the officer returned. I checked my service weapon, felt its weight, and set it aside. Violence would not fix this. Law would. By morning, I was at the station, filing reports no one expected me to file. Domestic assault, witness intimidation, financial discrepancies I had ignored for years. I called a lawyer who owed me favors and told him everything. He listened quietly, then said he would start immediately. Over the next days, I gathered evidence the way I had taught rookies: hospital photos, text messages, bank statements, a trail of lies hiding behind expensive gifts and false apologies. My daughter slept, bruised but alive, while I worked. Every step followed procedure, every move legal, every choice deliberate. Revenge is messy when driven by rage. Justice requires patience, and I had waited long enough. I knew he would deny everything. He always did. Public charm, private cruelty, a perfect mask. Friends would defend him. Family would hesitate. The system would move slowly, testing my resolve. I prepared for that. I prepared my daughter, too, explaining each step, each delay, each ugly question she would face. We documented everything again, signed statements, recorded timelines, secured backups. I spoke to doctors, neighbors, and coworkers, anyone whose truth could not be twisted. At night, I sat at the kitchen table, rereading case law, mapping outcomes, planning contingencies. Sleep came in fragments. Guilt tried to creep in, telling me I had failed her. I refused it. Responsibility is not ownership of another person's violence. The morning we filed charges, the courthouse felt colder than usual. He looked confident, almost bored, standing beside his attorney. He did not look at my daughter. I did. I squeezed her hand and felt her strength returning. This was no longer just about punishment. It was about protection, precedent, and proof. I was not hunting revenge. I was building a record that would stand. Whatever happens next will unfold in public, under lights that expose every flaw. There will be hearings, motions, delays, and doubt. There will be moments when fear returns, sharp and familiar. But there will also be moments of clarity, when truth feels heavier than lies. I will stand through all of it. I will speak when required, and stay silent when strategy demands. My badge does not make me immune to pain, but it teaches endurance. My daughter deserves safety, not excuses. She deserves a future untouched by someone else's anger. If you are listening, remember this story is not about a single night. It is about choosing order over chaos, law over impulse, and protection over shame. The door that opened at 1 in the morning did not close on my life. It opened a case, and I intend to see it finished. This is only the beginning. Facts will replace rumors, documents will outlast threats, time will test patience, but patience will win. I will not rush the ending, because endings built too fast collapse. I will move forward step by step, guided by evidence, not emotion. For my daughter, for myself, and for anyone who believes silence is safer than truth, I will keep going until the law speaks clearly, finally, and without mercy. This case will end, but the lesson will remain, written carefully, publicly, and permanently, for anyone watching, learning, or waiting for courage to finally stand up and act. The days after filing charges moved slowly, like the system itself was catching its breath. My daughter stayed home, curtains drawn, phone silent. Bruises fade faster than fear, and I saw it in the way she flinched at sudden sounds. I arranged temporary leave from her work and set up therapy sessions through contacts I trusted. Healing is not passive, it requires structure. Meanwhile, the case began its crawl. Summons were issued, statements were requested, paperwork multiplied like weeds. I welcomed it. Paper does not lie when handled correctly. My husband responded exactly as expected. First came denial, then confusion, then anger masked as concern. He called repeatedly, leaving messages that swung between apologies and threats. I saved them all. Voices are evidence. Patterns are evidence. People reveal themselves when they believe they are losing control. His lawyer attempted an early settlement, framing it as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. I declined without comment. Settlements are for accidents, not abuse. Behind the scenes, I expanded the scope of the investigation. Financial abuse often shadows physical violence, and I suspected more. I subpoenaed bank records going back 5 years. Transfers appeared, small at first, then larger. Payments to unfamiliar accounts. Gifts disguised as business expenses. The mistress was not just an affair, she was an investment. Property records confirmed it. An apartment purchased under a shell company, funded by marital assets. Fraud is louder than bruises in court. My lawyer smiled when I showed him the documents. We were no longer defending a victim, we were exposing a system of deception. The mistress became nervous once legal notices reached her door. She contacted me indirectly, asking for immunity. I did not answer immediately. Leverage is delicate. I waited, then offered a meeting with her attorney present. She arrived pale, hands shaking, confidence gone. She told her story quickly, afraid silence would cost her everything. Promises made, lies fed, threats delivered once she asked questions. Her testimony filled gaps my daughter could not. Corroboration changes everything.
With her statement signed and notarized, the case shifted. Media interest followed quietly, not headlines yet, but whispers. A respected businessman accused, a police officer filing charges against her own husband. People love contradictions. I prepared for scrutiny. Internal Affairs opened a review, standard procedure. I welcomed them too. Transparency protects credibility. I turned over my communications, my steps, my timing, everything aligned with protocol. They found no misconduct. The attempt to discredit me failed before it began. In court, preliminary hearings dragged. Motions to dismiss were denied. Requests to suppress evidence were rejected. Each ruling tightened the circle. My husband's posture changed. The smile disappeared. He finally looked at my daughter, eyes cold, calculating. She did not look away. That moment mattered more than any verdict. Strength returns in flashes. Outside the courtroom, relatives pressured us to stop. They spoke of reputation, forgiveness, unity. I listened, then reminded them that unity without accountability is just silence dressed nicely. Some walked away, others stayed quiet. I accepted both outcomes. Justice is not a popularity contest. At home, routines returned slowly. Meals cooked together, windows opened, laughter tested, cautious but real. Trauma does not vanish, it integrates. I watched my daughter reclaim small choices, clothes she liked, music she missed, plans she postponed. Each choice was resistance. The trial date was set months ahead, enough time for anxiety to grow and strategies to mature. I spent evenings rehearsing testimony, anticipating cross-examination, preparing my daughter for tactics meant to confuse and shame. We practiced breathing, pausing, asking for water. Control lives in preparation. The night before trial, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone, reviewing notes, not for facts, but for resolute. Doubt crept in, whispering consequences. Careers end, families fracture, lives change permanently. Then I remembered the door at 1 a.m, the weight in my arms, the choice I made to act. Regret belongs to inaction, not consequence. In the morning, we walked into court together. Cameras waited outside. Inside, the room felt smaller, tighter, focused. I took my seat, straight-backed, calm. This was no longer personal. It was procedural. Evidence would speak. Witnesses would testify. Truth would stack piece by piece until denial collapsed under its own weight. Whatever the outcome, the record would exist. That alone mattered. For my daughter, for anyone watching, and for myself, I was ready. The case moved forward, irreversible now, carried by momentum stronger than fear, guided by law instead of rage, and aimed at something more lasting than revenge. Accountability, written clearly where no one could erase it later.
The trial began with formalities that felt heavier than they sounded. Names were read. Charges were listed. The room listened without emotion, but I felt every word land. My husband's attorney opened with calm denial, painting him as misunderstood, stressed, betrayed by exaggeration. It was predictable. They rely on doubt, not truth. When my daughter took the stand, the air shifted. She spoke slowly, clearly, without drama. Dates, times, injuries, threats. The defense tried to interrupt her rhythm, but she held it. Each answer stayed inside the lines of fact. I watched jurors lean forward, pens moving. Attention is earned, and she earned it. When they showed the photographs, silence filled the room. Injuries are harder to dismiss when frozen in time. Cross-examination followed, sharp and invasive. They questioned her memory, her motives, her emotions. She did not argue, she answered. Calm dismantles aggression. When she stepped down, her shoulders dropped, like she had set something heavy aside. Then it was my turn. I testified as both witness and officer, careful to separate roles. I explained procedures, evidence handling, timelines. I avoided adjectives. Courts respect restraint. The defense attempted to frame my actions as revenge, bias driven by emotion. I responded with documentation, reports filed before contact, calls logged, evidence secured by third parties. Motive weakens when method is clean. The mistress testified next. She was nervous but steady. Her account matched records, messages, transfers. Corroboration stacked neatly. Each piece supported another, forming something solid. The defense objected repeatedly. Objections were overruled. Momentum matters. During recess, my husband avoided my eyes. He looked smaller than I remembered, not because he was weak, but because the mask was gone. Power hides in secrecy. Exposure changes scale. The prosecution rested. The defense called character witnesses. Friends spoke of generosity, temper control, charity. It sounded rehearsed. Character does not erase conduct. On cross, their timelines cracked. Dates conflicted. Certainty dissolved. Facts reasserted themselves. Closing arguments arrived sooner than expected. The prosecutor spoke about patterns, escalation, silence. She reminded the jury that abuse thrives where disbelief lives. The defense spoke about forgiveness, doubt, benefit of uncertainty. When it was over, the judge instructed the jury carefully. Burden of proof, reasonable doubt, deliberation. Then we waited. Hours passed slowly. I sat beside my daughter, counting breaths, grounding us both. I thought about all the cases I had seen fail because victims withdrew, because pressure worked. This time it hadn't. The jury returned just before evening. We stood. The verdict was read, clear and firm. Guilty, on all counts. The word echoed, then settled. My daughter exhaled like she had been holding air for years. My husband's shoulders sagged. Consequences arrived quietly. Sentencing was scheduled. Protection orders issued. Assets frozen pending restitution. Outside, cameras flashed. I declined interviews. This was not a spectacle. It was an outcome. In the days that followed, reactions varied. Some apologized. Some stayed silent. A few accused me of going too far. I ignored them. Justice is not measured by comfort. Sentencing came weeks later. The judge spoke about responsibility, harm, deterrence. Time was imposed, counseling mandated, financial penalties assessed. It was not dramatic. It was sufficient. Afterward, life did not return to normal. It reformed. My daughter moved to a new place. She changed her routines, her locks, her sense of safety. Therapy continued. So did progress. I returned to work, aware of eyes on me, respectful and curious. My badge felt heavier but steadier. I had not crossed a line. I had walked it carefully. Sometimes justice is not loud. It is methodical, patient, resistant to shortcuts. It asks for endurance. If you are listening, know this. Systems can work when used with precision. Evidence matters. Persistence matters. Silence protects harm. Speaking disrupts it. What happened to us cannot be undone, but it can be answered. The law spoke clearly this time. Not with anger, not with mercy, but with record and consequence. That is how change lasts. Not as a moment, but as a documented truth no one can rewrite later.
After sentencing, the noise faded faster than I expected. Courtrooms empty quickly once decisions are final. What remains is the quiet work of rebuilding. My daughter focused on routines first. Morning walks, simple meals, returning calls she had ignored for months. Control returns in ordinary choices. I helped without hovering. Protection should not become confinement. The restraining order was enforced immediately, and compliance was monitored closely. He tried once to test it, sending a message through a third party framed as concern. We documented it. The warning that followed was swift. Boundaries only work when enforced. At work, colleagues were careful with their words. Some treated me like glass. Others asked direct questions. I preferred the latter. Truth survives clarity. Internal memos circulated, outlining the case as an example of proper procedure. I did not volunteer to speak, but I agreed when asked. Training sessions followed, focusing on evidence handling in domestic cases, victim support, and conflicts of interest. Turning experience into instruction gave it purpose. Meanwhile, appeals were filed, as expected. Legal processes resist finality. The defense argued technicalities, interpretation, intent. We responded with transcripts and precedent. Appeals are battles of endurance. I had prepared for that. The appellate court upheld the verdict. The language was careful, thorough, decisive. Closure does not come with ceremony. It arrives as confirmation. My daughter read the decision quietly, then smiled. Not relief, recognition. That mattered. Months passed. She started a new job, one that valued flexibility and safety. She made friends who knew her story without defining her by it. Healing is not forgetting, it is integrating. I watched her stand straighter, speak more freely, laugh without checking the room. At home, we talked less about the case and more about plans. Trips postponed, classes considered, futures imagined. The past loosened its grip. I reflected often on restraint. I had access to power, but I chose process. That choice protected us both. The law is strongest when it resists impulse. I received letters from strangers who had followed the case. Some thanked me. Others shared their own stories. I answered when I could, directing them to resources, emphasizing documentation, patience, safety. I did not present myself as a hero. I presented a method. Methods scale. One evening, I cleaned out old files and found notes from early in my career, reminders about objectivity, empathy, limits. I had followed them, imperfectly but sincerely. The system did not bend because of who I was. It worked because I respected its boundaries. That distinction matters. People asked if I felt satisfied. The question missed the point. Satisfaction implies appetite. This was not hunger fulfilled, it was harm addressed. Justice is not joy, it is alignment. Consequences matched conduct. Records reflected reality. That is enough. My husband entered custody without spectacle. Time does what speeches cannot. I did not attend. I did not need to see him diminished. Accountability had already occurred. The rest was administration. My daughter chose not to change her name. She reclaimed it. Ownership can look like refusal. On anniversaries, she acknowledged progress, not trauma. We marked time differently now, not by what happened, but by what continued. I stayed vigilant, not paranoid. Trauma sharpens awareness. Awareness, when tempered, becomes skill. I carried lessons forward into other cases, recognizing patterns sooner, intervening earlier. Prevention is the quietest success. If you are listening, understand this ending is not dramatic. It is durable. Systems rarely deliver catharsis. They deliver records, orders, compliance, and change over time. That is how harm loses ground, by shrinking its space to operate, by naming it clearly, by refusing silence. The night at 1 a.m. set events in motion,
but it did not define us. What defined us were the choices that followed, repeated patiently until they held. This story does not end with applause. It ends with continuity, with mornings that arrive without fear, with doors that open because they can, not because they must, with a future constructed deliberately, one decision at a time, anchored in truth and protected by law.
Time has a way of testing conclusions. Long after courtrooms clear and files are archived, life continues to apply pressure. For us, the real work showed itself in quiet moments. My daughter learned to trust her instincts again, even when they whispered instead of shouted. She questioned less whether she was overreacting and more whether she was safe. That shift mattered. I encouraged independence without retreating from support. Balance is learned, not assumed. The protection order remained active, but its presence faded into background reassurance rather than constant reminder. We checked in monthly, then quarterly. Stability builds gradually. I returned fully to duty, taking cases that mirrored ours more closely than I expected. Each one carried echoes. I stayed disciplined. Personal experience sharpens empathy, but it must never steer outcomes. I leaned on checklists, peer review, and documentation. Systems protect objectivity when emotions threaten it. I noticed younger officers watching me more carefully, measuring what resolve looks like when it refuses shortcuts. I spoke plainly. Patience is not weakness, it is preparation. Outside work, my daughter rebuilt her social world. She set boundaries early, stating them without apology. She practiced saying no. Confidence is cumulative. She began volunteering at a shelter, offering practical help rather than stories. Purpose grounded her. I watched pride replace fragility. Healing does not erase scars, it teaches their location. Occasionally, news arrived about appeals exhausting themselves, motions denied, time served beginning to count. Each update landed softer than the last. Distance grew. Accountability does that. One afternoon, a colleague asked whether I would do anything differently. I considered it carefully. I would ask for help sooner. I would document earlier. I would listen faster. Systems reward early clarity. Delay only multiplies harm. That lesson became a refrain in trainings I led. We emphasized early intervention, coordinated response, survivor-centered planning. Outcomes improved. Numbers followed. Quietly. At home, traditions returned in altered forms. Holidays felt different, but honest. We did not perform happiness, we allowed it. Laughter came without permission. Silence felt safe again. These were victories no verdict could award. I thought often about power, not the obvious kind, but the subtle authority of consistency. Abusers rely on chaos and doubt. Consistency dismantles both. It shows up on time, writes things down, follows through. It does not rush endings. Letters continued to arrive. Some asked how to begin. I answered with steps, not speeches. Safety planning, documentation, trusted counsel. I avoided telling anyone to be brave. Courage is unreliable under threat. Preparation is better. Months later, my daughter decided to speak publicly, briefly, on her terms. She chose a small forum, limited audience, clear boundaries. I stood back. Ownership requires space. She told her story without details meant to entertain. She focused on choices, systems, and recovery. The response was respectful. That mattered. Not every story needs amplification. Some need containment.
I watched her walk off the stage steady, unburdened. That night we cooked together, music playing, windows open. Normalcy returned without announcement. I realized then that justice had not ended our story, it had stabilized it. The future no longer felt like a negotiation with fear, it felt open. If you are listening, understand that closure is not a door slamming shut, it is a hinge that stops squeaking. It allows movement without resistance. The work that follows is maintenance, checking locks, updating plans, revisiting boundaries. None of it dramatic, all of it necessary. I keep my notes, my records, my reminders, not as trophies, but as tools. They remind me that law is not abstract. It lives in kitchens, hallways, ordinary mornings. It shows up when someone decides that harm will not be normalized, and then acts patiently until that decision becomes reality. That is how protection persists, not through fury, but through fidelity to process, not through spectacle, but through sustained attention. Our lives now reflect that truth, quietly and completely in ways that matter more than any headline ever could.
Recovery is rarely linear. Just when routines settle, memory resurfaces without warning. A sound, a phrase, a shadow in a doorway can pull the past forward. We learned not to panic when that happened. Panic feeds relapse. Instead, we named the moment and let it pass. My daughter learned grounding techniques, simple actions that tether attention to the present. Cold water on wrists, naming objects in the room, controlled breathing. I practiced them too. Authority does not immunize you from aftershocks. At work, I pushed for policy updates based on cases like ours, mandatory lethality assessments, cross-agency coordination, clear escalation thresholds. Resistance appeared, as it always does. Change disrupts comfort. I persisted with data, not outrage. Patterns convince where anger fails. Gradually, procedures shifted. Training hours expanded. Language changed. Words matter. We stopped saying domestic disputes and started saying domestic violence incidents. Precision reframes responsibility. Community outreach followed. Quiet meetings, not press events. Survivors attended without cameras. We listened more than we spoke. Trust grows when attention does not demand performance. My daughter chose anonymity during these sessions. She sat near exits, controlled lighting, maintained agency. Control heals. Outside, life brought new tests. An old acquaintance attempted contact, fishing for information, cloaked in concern. We declined. Boundaries require enforcement. Silence is sometimes the clearest response. Appeals timelines crawled forward, predictable in their slowness. Each notice arrived, registered, and was filed. I refused to let paperwork dictate mood. Emotional discipline is learned. One evening, my daughter asked if I ever doubted my decisions. I answered honestly. Doubt exists. It sharpens thinking when it does not paralyze action. We discussed responsibility without self-blame. Blame collapses into guilt. Responsibility expands into choice. She nodded, absorbing the difference. That conversation mattered more than any lecture. Weeks later, she faced her first confrontation at work. A raised voice, a dismissive comment. She paused, documented, escalated appropriately, and followed through. She came home shaken but proud. I made tea. We sat. I told her competence is quiet courage. It does not announce itself. The town adjusted slowly. Familiar faces softened. Apologies emerged. I accepted some, declined others. Forgiveness is optional. Accountability is not. At the station, younger officers asked about burnout. I spoke about limits.
about leaving work at work when possible, about sleep, about the cost of carrying every case home. We instituted peer debriefs. Normalizing processing reduces attrition. Metrics improved. People stayed. Nights grew quieter, not because violence vanished, but because response improved. Prevention is invisible when it works. One afternoon, my daughter visited the old neighborhood with me. We drove past the street without stopping. Exposure on our terms. She breathed steadily, no tremor. That progress mattered. Later, she donated clothes she associated with the past. Letting go can be practical. We kept photographs, memory without attachment. I noticed my own vigilance soften. Hyper-awareness faded into attentiveness. There is a difference. The former exhausts, the latter protects. I returned to hobbies I had shelved. Running at dawn, gardening. The body remembers safety before the mind does. Seasons turned. The case receded from the headlines, as all cases do, but its impact remained in systems quietly improved. That felt like justice extended, not symbolic, but structural. My daughter began planning her future without contingency clauses. She talked about travel, about further study, about choosing joy deliberately. Those words landed heavy and light at once. One evening, she asked whether I regretted confronting power so directly. I answered that power unused decays into permission. Standing firm redraws lines others respect. The cost exists, yes, but so does the cost of silence. We weighed both. We chose the one that let us sleep. As months passed, my role shifted from shield to witness. I watched her claim space without scanning for threats. That transition is delicate. Overprotection can stall growth. I stepped back when needed. Presence without intrusion. On a quiet night, we shared a meal, windows open, city sounds distant. She laughed mid-sentence, unguarded. I realized then that survival had given way to living. The difference is subtle but profound. Survival narrows focus. Living expands it. Our days expanded. The past stayed where it belonged, not erased, integrated. And when reminders surfaced, they no longer demanded control. They received acknowledgement and release. That is how recovery matures. Not by forgetting, but by remembering without surrendering the present. We moved forward, steady, informed, unafraid to plan, prepared to respond, unwilling to return to silence. That resolution remains. It is quiet now, durable, and it carries us.
The longer peace lasts, the more fragile it can feel. Stability invites reflection, and reflection invites questions. My daughter began asking about identity beyond survival. Who was she now that fear no longer shaped her choices? The question wasn't philosophical, it was practical. She changed routines, experimented with interests, tested preferences. Some fit, others didn't. Exploration is a form of reclaiming agency. I encouraged curiosity without pressure. Reinvention should feel voluntary. At the station, I was assigned to review closed cases for procedural integrity. It was tedious work, but important. Patterns hide in archives. I found inconsistencies in documentation timing, witness follow-ups, evidence storage. Small gaps compound. I compiled a report, proposed corrections, and presented them without accusation. Improvement thrives when defensiveness is unnecessary. Leadership responded cautiously, then constructively. Reforms followed, quiet ones. My daughter noticed changes in me too. Less urgency, more patience. She said my voice sounded lighter. I hadn't realized weight had a sound. We attended a community workshop together, not as speakers, just participants. Listening together leveled us. We heard stories different from ours, intersecting but distinct.
no hierarchy of pain, only shared intent to move forward. That mattered. One evening, an unexpected letter arrived, not threatening, reflective. It came from a former neighbor who had believed the lies. The letter acknowledged harm caused by doubt and silence. I appreciated the accountability. I didn't respond immediately. Processing takes time. Later, I wrote back briefly. Acknowledgement accepted. Boundaries maintained. Closure does not require closeness. At home, my daughter began mentoring a younger colleague. She offered guidance without disclosure. Teaching reinforced her growth. Strength multiplies when shared. I watched her choose confidence without bravado. Authenticity is quieter than performance. At work, I advocated for survivor leave policies. Trauma doesn't follow payroll calendars. The proposal faced resistance framed as logistics. I reframed it as retention. Compassion retains talent. Data supported it. Policy passed. Incremental progress accumulates. I began sleeping better. Dreams changed. Fewer chases. More stillness. The nervous system recalibrates slowly. I respected the pace. My daughter started dating again, cautiously. Transparency guided her choices. Expectations stated early. Red flags acknowledged. I didn't interfere. Autonomy includes risk. Trust includes restraint. When she introduced me, the moment was ordinary. That ordinariness felt extraordinary. I smiled and let it be. A year approached since the night at the door. Anniversaries can ambush. We planned deliberately. Not a vigil, not a celebration. A hike. Movement helps memory metabolize. We walked, talked about neutral things, shared snacks. At the summit, she exhaled deeply. "I'm okay," she said. I believed her. Not because pain was gone, but because resilience had replaced fear as the default. That distinction matters. Back at the station, a new recruit asked why procedures mattered so much to me. I answered plainly. Procedures are promises kept in advance. When crisis hits, they carry you. Personal heroics fail under pressure. Systems endure. He nodded, understanding forming. Teaching creates continuity. The letter I delayed answering lingered in my thoughts. I wrote again, clarifying one thing. Belief is not passive. It is a choice with consequences. Silence can wound. The response that came back accepted that truth. Enough. We moved on. My daughter applied for a certification that would advance her career. She studied methodically, passed, celebrated modestly. Achievement without spectacle felt right. We cooked together, laughed, planned a small trip. Forward motion felt natural now. I noticed how rarely we referenced the past. Not avoidance, integration. The story had a place, not a grip. I kept my files organized, updated, archived, not as relics, as safeguards. Preparedness remains a habit. One night, we sat on the porch, lights low, listening to distant traffic. She asked what justice meant to me now. I thought before answering. Justice is alignment, between truth and outcome, between harm and accountability, between safety and dignity. It is rarely dramatic, often procedural, always human. She nodded, satisfied. That alignment felt present, not perfect, present. The future stretched without immediate threat. Plans formed without caveats. Hope returned without apology. If resilience has a sound, it is ordinary laughter drifting through open windows. That sound returned to our home. It stays most nights, and when it fades, we know how to bring it back.
With time, vigilance transforms into wisdom. The difference is subtle but essential. Vigilance scans for danger. Wisdom recognizes patterns without expecting harm everywhere. I watched that shift occur in both of us. My daughter no longer measured every room for exits, yet she noticed dynamics quickly. She trusted her read of people without assuming the worst. That balance is learned through lived correction. At work, I was asked to consult on a regional task force addressing repeat offender escalation. Data showed what intuition already knew. Early signals are often ignored because they feel inconvenient. We reframed inconvenience as warning. Protocols were adjusted to flag behaviors before violence peaked. Prevention thrives on anticipation. Some officers resisted, claiming intuition sufficed. I reminded them intuition is uneven. Systems level the field. The task force adopted standardized risk matrices. Quietly, outcomes improved. Fewer emergencies, more interventions upstream. My daughter began traveling independently for work. The first trip brought nerves she acknowledged without feeding. Preparation replaced fear. She shared itineraries, set check-in times, and then lived freely. Trust does not negate planning, it refines it. I respected her boundaries, resisting the urge to hover. Letting go is also protection. An invitation arrived to speak at a professional seminar. I declined the keynote and accepted a panel slot instead. Spotlight dilutes nuance. Panels invite complexity. I spoke about process, not pain. Attendees asked practical questions. That felt right. Afterward, a young attorney thanked me for naming how documentation saves survivors when narratives are challenged. That acknowledgement mattered. It meant lessons traveled beyond us. At home, routines became unremarkable again. Groceries, chores, small debates about music volume. Normal friction is healthy. It signals safety. We argued, resolved, moved on. No eggshells, no dread. That freedom is earned. I noticed how my daughter's laughter had changed. It came faster, lingered longer. Humor returned without defensiveness. She teased me gently. I accepted it. Humor rebuilds hierarchy into equality. I welcomed that shift. One afternoon, we visited my father's old land, the property once targeted by deceit. It had been restored legally, but emotionally untouched. Standing there felt different now. No anger, just continuity. The land had outlasted conflict. We walked its perimeter, talked about future possibilities without urgency. Ownership felt calm. That calm was new. At the station, an internal review uncovered misconduct unrelated to our case. Addressing it publicly was uncomfortable, but necessary. Integrity demands consistency. I supported transparency, despite pushback. Trust is cumulative and fragile. The process was messy, but it concluded with accountability. Morale dipped, then stabilized. Long-term trust increased. Hard truths clear space. My daughter noticed the toll it took on me and suggested a weekend away. We chose somewhere quiet, no agenda, just rest. We hiked, read, slept. The absence of threat allowed joy to surface spontaneously. That weekend recalibrated us both. Rest is not indulgence, it is maintenance. Upon returning, life resumed with a lighter cadence. My daughter finalized a long-term plan she'd been postponing. Commitment returned. Fear no longer vetoed decisions. Watching her choose with confidence reaffirmed everything we had endured. Healing does not announce milestones. It accumulates until one day you realize fear no longer edits your future. I continued mentoring, focusing on sustainable careers. Burnout prevention became a priority. We normalized seeking help. Strength reframed as interdependence. That cultural shift mattered. Officers stayed longer. Errors decreased. Lives improved quietly. One evening, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. Thunder rattled windows. My daughter paused, then continued what she was doing. No flinch. I noticed and said nothing. Progress doesn't need commentary. Later, she mentioned it herself, surprised. We shared a look of mutual understanding. The body remembers safety eventually. I received a final notice confirming all appeals were exhausted. The paper went into a folder labeled closed. I didn't reread it. Closure had already happened. The file joined others, indistinct. That anonymity felt appropriate. The story had returned to private life. As seasons turned, we hosted friends again. Laughter filled rooms. Stories overlapped. Community rebuilt organically. Not everyone returned. That was okay. Alignment matters more than numbers. My daughter toasted to ordinary days. We clinked glasses. Ordinary days are the goal. As night settled, I reflected on what remained. Vigilance softened into when a life steadies, meaning seeks expression. Not explanation, but application. I began considering what legacy looked like beyond policy changes and closed files. Legacy is often misunderstood as recognition. I see it as transfer, knowledge passed forward intact. I formalized mentorship structures at the station, pairing experienced officers with new recruits for year-long rotations. Continuity reduces mistakes. Accountability improves confidence. Results followed quietly. Complaints declined, response time stabilized, burnout slowed. My daughter noticed how purpose sharpened my focus without urgency. She said it looked like calm resolve. I accepted the observation. Calm is earned. She too sought expression. She volunteered with a professional association, contributing skills rather than stories. Privacy remained intact. Impact expanded. That balance mattered. One afternoon, she asked if justice ever feels complete. I told her completeness is a myth. Justice is iterative. It adapts, corrects, advances. That answer satisfied her. Expectations shape peace. At work, an audit required testimony regarding procedural reforms. I prepared meticulously, knowing scrutiny improves outcomes. The review concluded favorably, recommending broader adoption. Recognition came as an email, then faded. Implementation mattered more. I archived the message, systems over praise. At home, the rhythms of care continued. Meals shared, occasional disagreements resolved without escalation. Emotional safety persisted. That consistency is not glamorous, but it is profound. We began planning a longer trip together, not as escape, as curiosity, choice driven by desire, not avoidance. The planning itself was enjoyable. Maps spread across the table, options weighed lightly. The past stayed dormant. That dormancy felt like freedom. A former colleague reached out, seeking guidance after mishandling a sensitive case. He approached with humility. I agreed to help under clear conditions. Learning requires honesty. We reviewed errors without shaming. He corrected course. Follow-up showed improvement. Redemption is practical. It arrives through changed behavior. My daughter celebrated a professional milestone quietly. We marked it with a handwritten note and a favorite meal. Extravagance can overshadow meaning. Intimacy preserves it. I noticed how rarely she checked locks now. Muscle memory relaxes gradually. One evening, she said she trusted her instincts again. That trust had been stolen, then rebuilt deliberately. Hearing that felt like closure layered over growth. At the station, I advocated for cross-disciplinary training. Legal, medical, social services aligned responses reduce harm. The pilot program faced budget constraints. We reallocated funds from outdated initiatives. Resistance softened when outcomes were clear. Collaboration increased, silos dissolved, progress emerged.
My daughter began mentoring more formally, designing a framework that emphasized consent, boundaries, and self-advocacy. She asked for feedback. I offered structural suggestions and stepped back. Ownership strengthens commitment. Watching her lead felt different than protecting her. Pride replaced vigilance. That shift marked time. A minor setback occurred. A careless comment from a stranger triggered a brief spiral. She recognized it quickly, named it, sought support, recovered. Resilience is not the absence of reaction, it is the speed of return. We discussed it openly, without alarm. Growth includes moments. The city hosted a public forum on safety initiatives. I attended anonymously, sitting in the back. Listening matters. Community voices highlighted gaps we hadn't seen. I took notes. Adjustments followed. Leadership requires humility. My daughter noticed my anonymity and smiled. Influence without identity felt right. We returned home under streetlights, talking about nothing important. That nothing mattered. I filed another set of papers, closed another chapter. The weight was minimal. Perspective had shifted. Crises compress time. Recovery expands it. We planned forward months at a time. Confidence breeds continuity. One night, my daughter asked what she feared now. I considered the question carefully. I said complacency. Progress can lull systems into neglect. Vigilance must persist without panic. She nodded, understanding. Balance again. We shared tea, silence comfortable. The future felt navigable. Not guaranteed, navigable. That distinction carries peace. The past no longer demanded rehearsal. The present held attention. The future invited planning. I realized then that justice had become a living practice rather than a destination. That practice sustained us, and as long as it did, we would remain aligned, steady, and unafraid to continue building lives defined not by harm endured, but by values chosen.
Time has a way of testing what we claim to have learned. It introduces quieter challenges, the kind that do not announce themselves as crises. I noticed this as routines deepened. Familiarity can breed neglect if left unattended. I stayed attentive without tightening control. That balance had become instinct. My daughter, now firmly rooted in her sense of self, moved with a confidence that no longer required reassurance. She made decisions quickly, accepted consequences calmly, adjusted without self-reproach. That maturity was hard-won. Watching it unfold felt like witnessing weather settle after a storm. At work, leadership shifted. New administrators brought different priorities, some misaligned with the reforms we had built. Change tests durability. I responded by documenting outcomes meticulously. Data is resilient. Opinions shift. Evidence endures. Meetings became negotiations rather than directives. Progress slowed but did not reverse. That mattered. Institutional memory protects gains. My daughter noticed my longer hours and reminded me of boundaries. Roles had reversed gently. I listened. Leadership includes receiving counsel. I delegated more, trusting the structures we had strengthened. The system held. That confirmation brought relief. We celebrated small wins. A weekend breakfast, a shared joke. The texture of ordinary joy continued. A letter arrived from a survivor who had benefited indirectly from the policy changes. She described safety regained through early intervention. The connection was anonymous, the gratitude understated. I read the letter twice, then filed it away. Not for motivation, for remembrance. Impact can be invisible to the one who initiates it. At home, my daughter finalized plans to relocate for an opportunity she had chosen freely. The announcement came without fear, only excitement. We discussed logistics, not safety contingencies. That absence was significant.
Change now meant growth, not escape. Preparation remained practical, not anxious. I supported her decision fully. Letting go is a skill learned through trust. The move approached. We packed together, sorting objects by meaning. Some items traveled, others stayed. Memory does not require weight. On the last night before departure, we cooked a familiar meal. The conversation flowed easily. Gratitude surfaced naturally, not for survival, but for continuity. At the station, I formalized succession plans. Knowledge transfer was deliberate, no single point of failure. Sustainable systems outlive individuals. I stepped back from daily oversight, shifting into advisory roles. Distance clarified impact. The reforms held without constant reinforcement. That was success. On departure day, the morning was unremarkable. Coffee, keys, a brief pause at the door. We hugged, no tears. Trust carried the moment. She left with confidence. I returned to a quiet house that felt full, not empty. Space is not absence, it is potential. Days settled into a new rhythm. I maintained contact without intrusion. Updates came organically. She thrived. That confirmation felt steady, not urgent. At work, I addressed a final review panel. I spoke about sustainability, about designing systems that anticipate fatigue and failure. Panels appreciate pragmatism. The recommendations passed. Implementation followed. My role concluded gracefully. Closure achieved through continuity, not ceremony. One evening, I sat on the porch alone, listening to the city breathe. I reflected on the arc behind us. Crisis demanded speed. Recovery demanded patience. Growth demanded restraint. Each phase taught a different discipline. The integration of those disciplines created stability. I recognized gratitude without nostalgia. The past did not pull me backward. It informed without insisting. That is maturity. Weeks later, a call came from my daughter. She spoke about new colleagues, new challenges, new joys. No fear edged her voice, only curiosity. I listened, content. We had done what was needed, not perfectly, sufficiently. I closed my eyes and breathed. The house held quiet. The work continued elsewhere. Justice, I realized, is not a story with an ending. It is a practice passed forward, adjusted by those who receive it. We had passed it. Now it lived beyond us. That was enough.
The story does not end with closure. It changes shape. What began as survival matured into stewardship. I stepped fully into a quieter role, offering guidance only when asked. The systems we built continued to function without my constant presence. That continuity was the measure of success. My days simplified, focused on health, routine, and deliberate rest. I learned to trust the work already done, resisting the urge to re-enter every discussion. Influence lingered quietly, embedded in processes and habits. I found satisfaction in that subtlety, a reward for restraint learned over time. It felt durable, humane, and sufficient. Finally, my daughter settled into her new life with curiosity and competence. She navigated unfamiliar spaces confidently, building relationships on clarity rather than caution. We spoke regularly, sharing updates without obligation. Distance refined our bond, removing urgency while preserving trust. When challenges arose, she addressed them methodically, seeking counsel without surrendering ownership. That balance confirmed growth. She celebrated achievements modestly, learned from mistakes quickly, and moved forward without rumination. I listened more than advised, offering perspective sparingly. Pride arrived quietly, steady and warm.
It stayed present, unannounced, reliable. Her laughter sounded free. That was enough for me then. Always, unquestionably, enough. Professionally, I completed my transition into advisory service. The organization adopted maintenance cycles to prevent regression. Audits, training, and review remained scheduled, funded, and staffed. I resisted nostalgia, refusing to anchor identity to past crises. Leadership is healthiest when replaceable. I taught that openly, emphasizing succession as care. Colleagues advanced, bringing fresh insight without dismantling foundations. Disagreements occurred, resolved through evidence and dialogue. The culture matured, less reactive, more deliberate. Results reflected that steadiness. Communities experienced fewer emergencies, earlier support, better outcomes. Progress remained imperfect, but directionally sound. I accepted that reality gratefully, committed to continued learning, even now, later. Personally, I reclaimed time once consumed by vigilance. Mornings opened slowly, anchored by movement, reading, and quiet. I tended the garden, watched seasons teach patience, and accepted limits without judgment. Health improved as stress receded, sleep deepened, appetite normalized, attention steadied. Friends returned to regular visits, conversation light and honest. We spoke of plans, not defenses. I learned to enjoy celebrations without scanning rooms. Safety had become ambient. When memories surfaced, they passed without command. Integration replaced resistance. The body agreed. Calm endured. I honored it daily, protecting peace through simple choices, consistent boundaries, gentle discipline, and gratitude. Always, consistently. The anniversary passed quietly, unmarked by ceremony. I noticed the date, acknowledged it, then continued living. That neutrality signaled freedom. My daughter called later, unaware of the significance. We laughed about ordinary things. The moment passed naturally. Justice had moved into background maintenance, like infrastructure you trust when it works. I reviewed notes from earlier years, then archived them, not to forget, but to free attention. Forward focus felt appropriate. I set intentions rather than goals. Intentions guide behavior gently. Goals can narrow vision. Balance mattered. The days remained full, purposeful, humane. I trusted that rhythm, sustaining it with care. Occasionally, news arrived of policy expansion inspired by earlier work. I felt pleased, then let it go. Ownership had dispersed, as intended. My role became encouragement, not authorship. I answered questions, declined credit, and redirected praise. Credit concentrates, diffusion sustains. I wrote occasionally, clarifying principles without narrating pain. Readers responded thoughtfully, applying ideas locally. That replication mattered. The work lived independently. My daughter sent photos from travels, smiling, grounded. I saved them not from worry, but affection. Distance no longer equaled fear. Trust held. The future looked open, manageable, inviting. I accepted that invitation with humility, readiness, and calm. Yes. When asked what remains, I answer simply: attention, care, alignment. These guideposts endure beyond any case. They scale across systems and homes. I practice them daily, adjusting as contexts change. My daughter practices them too, shaping her choices. We share language, not wounds. That distinction preserves dignity. I remain prepared, not afraid. Preparedness respects reality. Fear distorts it. The lesson is learned. I trust that lesson now. It carries forward through others, unseen. Quiet competence accumulates. Lives improve without spectacle. That outcome satisfies me. It always has. It always will. Endings soften. Beginnings continue. We continue. Aligned, awake, humane, steady. This final chapter closes without fanfare. Resolution lives in maintenance, not drama. What matters is preserved, practiced, and passed on. I release the narrative now, confident in its direction. The future remains unwritten, approached with care. We choose values daily, reinforcing them through action. Harm no longer defines us, choice does. I end here, present, attentive, sufficient. The work continues elsewhere, strengthened by those who received it. May it remain kind, precise, and firm. May it protect dignity, invite courage, and honor truth. With that, I step back, grateful, ready, complete, yet open. The line holds. We hold. Life holds.
The story you've just heard is fictional, yet it draws from real moments many people live through every day. Names, places, and details were changed to protect those who deserve safety and privacy. This story is not told to accuse, but to invite reflection. How many parents are carrying pain quietly behind closed doors? I truly want to know. If you were standing where I stood, what choice would you make? Would you stay silent to preserve appearances, or would you step forward to reclaim your voice and dignity? Share your thoughts below, because every shared reflection becomes a small light for someone still searching their way out. I believe strength is never wasted, and courage always opens the door to better tomorrows. Before you leave, the end screen will show 2 of this channel's most powerful stories. I promise they're worth your time. Thank you for listening until the very end. Your support keeps these stories alive today.